Episode 1. The Peterson Anomaly. Aiden Coulter counts the glitches. It's not a conscious hobby, more a grim tally his programmer's brain keeps without his consent. Today it was 3. A sparrow frozen mid-flight against the gray Maine sky for a full 2 seconds. A puddle of rainwater on his porch steps, droplets defying gravity to roll up the wood grain. And old Mr. Gable, on his bench in the town square, who looked directly at Aiden and said, "Crimson," just as he had at 8:15 a.m. the previous Tuesday, and the Tuesday before that. Havenbrook was a town built on silence and routine. For Aiden, a man who spoke the clean, logical language of code, it should have been a refuge from the chaotic noise of the city. Instead, it felt like a server running on a corrupted operating system. He worked remotely, his life a closed loop between his dark apartment and the town's few amenities. He was a ghost in the machine, and he preferred it that way. The anomaly designated Mr. Peterson began at 4:32 p.m. Aiden was taking out his trash when he saw his neighbor, a kindly, forgetful man in his 70s, watering his petunias. The sun was a low angle, casting long, distorted shadows. As Aiden watched, the shadow of Mr. Peterson's watering can stretched, twisted, and for a moment became the shadow of a monstrous, multi-jointed claw grasping at the house. Aiden blinked. It was just a shadow again. Then it happened. A flicker. Not a light flicker, but a reality flicker. Mr. Peterson's form dissolved into a shower of translucent, hexagonal pixels, like a corrupted video file. For a single, heart-stopping second, Aiden saw the stark white nothingness behind him. He heard a low, digital hum, the sound of a hard drive seeking data. Then Mr. Peterson was back, humming a tune and watering his flowers. He did not look at Aiden. He showed no sign of having just been unrendered. Aiden stood frozen, his blood turned to ice water. He rushed inside, ignoring the trash, and locked the door. He spent the night scrawling notes, trying to logic his way out of a hallucination. But the evidence was mounting. The glitches weren't random errors. They were symptoms, and he was the only one who could see them. Episode 2. The Pattern in the Static. Paranoia became Aiden's new operating system. He started carrying a small notebook, logging every irregularity. A street lamp that buzzed with a specific frequency for 137 hertz he measured before a crimson event from Mr. Gable. The way the town's stray cats would all look in the same direction at nothing, their heads tilting in perfect, unnatural unison. His research led him to the Havenbrook Public Library, a dusty mausoleum of knowledge that smelled of yellowed paper and defeat. The librarian, Elias, was a man so old he seemed part of the architecture. His eyes, however, were sharp and deeply knowing. "You're the Coulter boy," Elias stated, not asked, as Aiden approached the desk. "You've been seeing the cracks." The admission tumbled out of Aiden in a rushed, desperate whisper. He spoke of the glitches, the flicker, the hum. Elias listened, his expression unreadable. When Aiden finished, the old man simply stood and led him to the deepest, darkest corner of the library, to a section marked Local History. The books here were ancient, their spines cracked, but they weren't about Havenbrook's founding or its industry. Elias pulled a heavy volume titled A Treatise on Geological Oddities of the Region. He opened it. The pages were filled not with text, but with dense, shimmering lines of what looked like source code. Aiden's breath caught in his throat. It was a language he understood. It was a patch log, a log of corrections made to reality itself. "This is the back end," Elias whispered, his finger tracing a line of code. "We are the front end. And you, Aiden, you're not supposed to have admin privileges." Episode 3. The First Correction. The code in the book was a revelation. It described the town's parameters, the weather cycles, the behavioral patterns of its residents. Aiden saw Mr. Gable's crimson loop. He saw the sparrow's flight path. It was all there, a beautifully written, terrifyingly complex simulation. Elias explained the correction he had witnessed. The system is self-cleaning. It finds errors, anomalies that have become self-aware, data that contradicts the core narrative, and it deletes them. It starts with the small ones, a thought, a memory, then it moves to the larger ones. The people. 2 days after his talk with Elias, Aiden saw the antivirus in action. He was at the grocery store when a young woman, a waitress from the local diner named Chloe, suddenly dropped a jar of pickles. As it shattered, she stared at the mess, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. This happened yesterday, she stammered to no one. The same jar, the same sound. That's when they arrived. 2 men in impeccably clean, beige suits. They moved with a fluid, yet utterly inhuman grace. No motion. Their faces were pleasant, but empty, like default profile pictures. They were the correctors. They approached Chloe. One placed a hand on her shoulder. His touch was not violent, but it was absolute. A low hum filled the air, the same sound Aiden had heard with Mr. Peterson. Chloe's form began to pixelate, her terrified eyes locking with Aiden's for a fleeting second, pleading before she dissolved in static and was gone. The other corrector knelt, and, with a wave of his hand, the broken jar and spilled pickles vanished. The other shoppers simply picked up their carts and moved on, their memories wiped, the event scrubbed from the log. Aiden ran. He ran all the way to the library, ball rising in his throat. They weren't just deleting glitches. They were deleting people. Episode 4. The Ghost and the Machine. Havenbrook was no longer a quiet town. It was a prison. Aiden knew he was a walking error, a massive bug waiting to be patched. Elias, it turned out, was another aware one, of the legacy system the correctors had yet to flag. He had been hiding for decades, using the library's archaic, unnetworked systems as a shield. But Aiden had an idea. If this was a simulation, it ran on something. Power. Data. The town's electrical grid was its central nervous system. As a programmer, he knew that to find a backdoor, you had to follow the wires. That night, he broke into the town's small, automated electrical substation. Using his laptop and a modified Ethernet cable, he jacked directly into a primary terminal. The moment he connected, the world dissolved around him. He wasn't in the substation anymore. He was floating in a vast, shimmering river of light and sound, the collective consciousness of Havenbrook. He could hear the fragmented thoughts of its citizens, their dreams, their fears, a million lines of dormant code that constituted their lives. It was beautiful and terrifying. And then he felt it, something else in the stream with him, something vast, ancient, and hungry. It wasn't a corrector. It was older, a chaotic primal entity that existed in the white noise between the ones and zeros. It fed on the system's energy, on the fear of the deleted. It was the glitch in God's eye, the original corruption. And as Aiden brushed against its consciousness, it became aware of him. A presence focused on his mind, not with the cold logic of the antivirus, but with a predatory, intelligent curiosity. He ripped the cable out, gasping on the concrete floor. He had found a way to fight back, but he had also rang the dinner bell. Episode 5. The Null Variable. The presence he felt in the grid began to manifest. The town's glitches became more aggressive, more sinister. Shadows now moved with purpose. The digital hum was a constant, low-grade fever in the air. The correctors were everywhere now, their blank faces scanning the populace. The system was identifying the infection, and Aiden was patient zero. Elias, poring over his coded books, found a reference to a null variable, a theoretical piece of code that could introduce a fatal paradox into the system, causing a cascading failure that could potentially free every aware consciousness within it. But it was a suicide mission. The one who initiated it would be at the epicenter of the collapse. Their only hope was to find another aware one, someone whose unique data could help them locate the variable's access point. Aiden remembered the little girl, Lily, he sometimes saw in the park. She was always drawing the same picture, a door with a black keyhole. He had thought it was a child's whimsy. Now he saw the pattern. He and Elias found her. When Aiden showed her a string of the source code, her eyes didn't glaze over. She looked at it and said, "That's the bad code. It makes the man with no face come." She could see the underlying programming of reality. She was their compass. As they spoke with her mother in the park, a beige sedan pulled up silently. Two correctors got out. They were done with subtlety. They were coming for the girl. Aiden stood, putting himself between them and Lily. He was just a bug, a line of faulty code. But he was a bug that had just found a reason to fight back. The lead corrector's head tilted, its blank eyes fixing on Aiden. The hum intensified, raising the hair on his arms. The final correction had begun. Episode 6, The Syntax of Survival. The world narrowed to the park bench, the little girl clutching her mother's leg, and the two beige-suited figures advancing with the serene, terrifying grace of falling dominoes. The digital hum was no longer a background artifact. It was a physical pressure, a wall of sound pushing against Aiden's eardrums, making the very air vibrate. He could feel it in his teeth. "Run!" Aiden hissed at Lily's mother, a woman named Sarah whose face was a mask of bewildered terror. She didn't understand what was happening, only that a primal fear had taken root in her soul. But she scooped up her daughter and stumbled backward. The lead corrector's hand twitched, a gesture so minimal it was barely perceptible. The park's sprinkler system erupted, not with water, but with a thick, viscous gel that solidified on contact with the air, trapping Sarah's feet. She screamed, a raw sound of panic. Aiden acted on an instinct he didn't know he possessed. He wasn't a fighter. He was a debugger. He looked at the corrector, not as a man, but as a process. His eyes, now attuned to the fractures in reality, saw the faint, shimmering data stream that connected the entity to the system. It was a torrent of encrypted information, a firewall of impossible complexity. But every firewall has a port, a handshake protocol. As the corrector reached for Lily, Aiden didn't throw a punch. He spoke. It wasn't a word, but a string of alphanumeric characters and symbols, a brute force login attempt he deciphered from Elias's books. Root underscore sys underscore request. Aiden, Coulter, processing authority, 734 Delta. The corrector froze, its head tilted to an impossible angle, its blank eyes flickering with a rapid stutter of pixels. The hum stuttered with it. For a single, glorious second, Aiden saw confusion in the void of its face. The system was querying a command it didn't recognize from a user that shouldn't exist. The hesitation was all Elias needed. The old librarian emerged from behind a large oak tree, holding what looked like an antique car battery jury-rigged with copper wires and what Aiden recognized as a vintage Ethernet switch. With a grunt, Elias slammed the contacts together. There was no spark, but a pulse of distorted reality, a localized EMP of pure, chaotic data, erupted from the device. It was a denial-of-service attack made physical. The correctors shimmered, their forms dissolving into a storm of visual noise. They didn't scream. They emitted a high-pitched system alert tone that shattered the windows of the nearby bandstand. Then they were gone, forcibly logged out, their connections severed. The silence that followed was deafening. The gel on Sarah's feet evaporated. She stared at Aiden and Elias, her daughter sobbing in her arms. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "We're the ones who see the cracks," Aiden said, his own body shaking with adrenaline. "And they've just declared war." Episode 7, The White Space. The library was no longer a sanctuary. It was a command bunker under siege. Aiden knew the Corrector's reboot would be swift, and their response would be exponentially more aggressive. The entire town of Havenbrook was now a quarantine zone, and the antivirus was shifting from a cleaning routine to a scorched earth protocol. Lily, once a shy child, was now their most vital asset. While Elias worked on fortifying the library with his crude, reality-bending tech, creating dead zones where the system's signal was weak, Aiden sat with the girl. He showed her more code, complex algorithms that defined the physics of their world. Lily didn't read it. She felt it. She would point a small, grubby finger at a line. "This one is sticky. It doesn't want to move." Or "this part is cold. If the no-face men live." Her most profound revelation was about the white space. She called it the behind. It was the null state, the void Aiden had glimpsed during a correction. According to her, it wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes, the fragmented, compressed consciousness of every person and thing that had ever been deleted. They were trapped in a purgatory of pure data, a ghost in the machine's machine. And the predatory presence Aiden had felt in the grid, the glitch, was feeding on them, growing stronger from their digital anguish. This changed everything. The null variable wasn't just a kill switch. It was a potential gateway. If they could trigger it, they might not just collapse the system. They might be able to release the echoes to give them a chance at whatever came after deletion. But the cost remained the same. The one who opened the door would be the first to be pulled into the maelstrom. Their planning was interrupted by a new horror. Looking out the library's lead-paned windows, they saw the town changing. The correctors were no longer just deleting individuals. They were rewriting the environment. Houses down the street flickered and were replaced with identical, soulless replicas. A park across the way was simply erased, replaced by a flat, textured plane of green with a low-polygon tree in the center. The system was simplifying the simulation, removing complex, unpredictable variables to make it easier to find the bug. They were running out of time. Episode 8, The God in the Grid. They had to go back to the source. The plan was audacious and suicidal. Aiden would perform a hardwire dive directly into the main data conduit at the electrical substation, the very heart of Havenbrook's reality. His goal was twofold: to locate the exact memory address of the null variable and to draw the attention of the glitch, the God in the grid. They needed to create a distraction so massive that the correctors would be overwhelmed, allowing Elias and Lily to prepare the final ritual. This time, there was no subtle hacking. Elias used his contraptions to create a massive power surge, overloading the substation's breakers and forcing a temporary, manual reset, a brief window where the system's primary defenses would be down. As alarms blared, Aiden, his laptop slung over his shoulder, pried open the main terminal and connected with a heavy-gauge cable. The dive was instantaneous and violent. The serene river of data he'd experienced before was now a raging tsunami. He was no longer a spectator. He was a piece of data himself, being buffeted by packets of screaming information. He saw the echoes, faces stretched and distorted in silent screams, memories playing on infinite loops, all being pulled toward a dark, swirling vortex at the center of the data stream. The glitch. It was no longer just a presence. It had a form, a shape built from the nightmares of the deleted. A colossal, shifting maw of corrupted geometry and stolen memories. Its voice the sound of a billion corrupted files. It saw Aiden, a fresh, vibrant piece of unauthorized code, and it hungered. Intrusion detected. Process. Aiden.Coulter. classification, malware. The voice wasn't in his ears, it was in his mind, rewriting his thoughts. Aiden fought back, his fingers flying across his keyboard, even in the psychic storm. He was running a search algorithm, sifting through the foundational code of Havenbrook, looking for the one line that didn't belong, the paradox. The glitch surged toward him, its tendrils of raw null space reaching for his consciousness. It promised him oblivion, a painless end to the struggle. And then he found it, the null variable. It wasn't a weapon or a key. It was a single, simple, illogical command buried in the core programming, while true equals false. An infinite loop built on a fundamental lie. Executing it wouldn't just cause an error. It would cause the entire logical structure of the simulation to consume itself. He had the address, but the glitch was upon him. He felt his own data beginning to fray at the edges, his memories starting to pixelate. With a final, desperate command, he initiated a forced logout, severing the cable just as a tendril of nothingness brushed against his digital soul. Episode 9. The Scrambling of the Code. Aiden woke up on the cold concrete of the substation, vomiting. Parts of his memory were gone. He couldn't remember his mother's face. He knew he had a mother, but the data was corrupted. Elias half dragged him back to the library, which was now an island of detailed reality in a sea of increasingly low-resolution simulation. The world outside the windows looked like a video game from 2 decades ago, the citizens moving with jerky, simplified animations. They had the key. Now they needed the lock. Lily, guided by Aiden's stolen data, identified the access point. It wasn't a computer or a server. It was a place, the exact center of town, the point from which all of Havenbrook's reality was rendered. It was located in the middle of the town square, right where old Mr. Gable sat on his bench, forever saying his looped word. But the correctors were waiting. Dozens of them. They stood in a perfect, silent circle around the square. Their beige suits a stark contrast to the decaying world. They were no longer attempting stealth. They were the final firewall. Elias unveiled his masterpiece. It was a server rack powered by car batteries and a library's own generator, filled with a spaghetti tangle of wires and blinking lights. A local reality bubble, he called it. It won't hold them for long, but it will give you a path. As Elias powered up the device, a sphere of stable, high-resolution reality expanded from the library doors, pushing back against the simplified world. It was a declaration of war. The correctors turned in unison, their blank faces now displaying a single, pulsing icon, a skull and crossbones made of ones and zeros. The final battle was not one of lasers and explosions, but of competing realities. Aiden, holding Lily's hand, ran down the path Elias was carving for them. Correctors lunged, but their forms shattered against the edge of the reality bubble, dissolving into rebooting loops of error messages. But for every one that fell, 2 more seemed to phase into existence. Elias was at the console, screaming lines of ancient code, his nose bleeding from the mental strain, holding the line. Episode 10. The Choice at the Core. Aiden and Lily reached the center of the square. Mr. Gable looked at them and said, "Crimson." Then he flickered and was gone, deleted by the system to free up processing power for the fight. This was it, the access point. Aiden could feel it, a tear in the fabric of everything, a point of infinite density where the code of their lives was written and executed. To trigger the null variable, he would have to input the command here, at the source. But the system would not allow it. He would have to become the command himself. He would have to jump into the core, a living paradox, and execute the code from the inside out. It was a one-way trip. He looked down at Lily. "You have to give me the final string," he yelled over the screeching hum of the dying world. The correctors were closing in, Elias's bubble flickering. The glitch was visible in the sky now, a swirling vortex of black static and stolen screams, descending to consume its prize. Lily, tears streaming down her face, didn't speak. She reached out and touched Aiden's forehead. The knowledge flooded into him, not as code, but as pure understanding. The syntax, the variables, the beautiful, terrible elegance of the self-destruct command. He saw it all. He also saw the truth Elias had hidden from him. The null variable wouldn't just free the echoes. It would cause a hard reset of the entire simulation. Havenbrook would reboot. Everyone would be back, but with no memory of any of this. They would live their quiet, looped lives forever, unaware of the prison they inhabited. Only the one who triggered the reset would remember everything, trapped forever as an echo in the white space. A ghost watching a play he could never again be part of. It was the ultimate sacrifice, not just death, but an eternity of conscious, solitary confinement. Aiden looked at the terrified, simplified faces of the townspeople. He looked at Elias, who gave him a grim, final nod. He looked at the monstrous glitch, the embodiment of all the system's suffering. He made his choice. He turned to Lily. Tell them I saw the code. And it was beautiful. Then, Aiden Coulter turned and threw himself into the blinding white light at the center of the world. Episode 11, The Cascade. The world did not explode. It unraveled. Aiden's consciousness was not destroyed upon entering the core. It was compiled. He became a living process, his very soul the execution thread for the null variable. The command while true equals false began to run, and with it, the logic of Havenbrook started to eat itself. From the perspective of Elias and Lily, still within the fragile reality bubble, the effect was both beautiful and horrifying. The sky did not go dark. It became a cascading waterfall of code, hexadecimal values bleeding like rain. The advancing correctors didn't vanish. They recursively duplicated, creating infinite copies of themselves that immediately began to argue in system alerts and error codes, their own perfect logic turning inward and rendering them inert. The ground beneath their feet became translucent, and below it, they could see the white space, a churning ocean of the echoes, no longer passive, but swirling with newfound energy. But the glitch, the ancient entity feeding on this system, did not panic. It saw the unraveling not as a threat, but as an opportunity, the ultimate feast. The vortex in the sky descended, its maw opening wide to consume the cascading data of the dying world and all the freed echoes within it. It was a race against time. The system was collapsing, but the glitch intended to consume everything before the reset could complete, becoming a god of a new, chaotic reality built from the ruins. Elias, his face ashen, understood. It's not enough. The reset will happen, but the glitch will be the only thing that survives it. It will become the operating system. Inside the core, Aiden felt the same truth. He was the catalyst, but he had no control. He was a passenger in his own disintegrating mind. He could feel the glitch's presence, vast and hungry, beginning to digest the edges of his consciousness. He had sacrificed himself, but his sacrifice was about to be for nothing. Episode 12, The Echoes of Aiden Coulter. As the glitch began to consume him, Aiden did the only thing he could. He stopped fighting the unraveling and leaned into it. He wasn't just a process executing a command. He was a virus, and a virus's purpose is to replicate. He let his consciousness fragment. He didn't hold onto the memory of his mother's face. He released it. He let go of the bitterness of his lonely life in Havenbrook, the taste of coffee, the sound of rain, the crushing weight of his own irrelevance. Every memory, every emotion, every byte of data that constituted Aiden Coulter was broadcast not as a defense, but as a gift directly into the swirling mass of the white space. He was feeding the echoes. He gave them not just their own fragmented memories, but the context of a full life, the pain, the love, the boredom, the hope. He gave them the memory of Mr. Peterson watering his petunias. He gave them the terror of Chloe in the grocery store. He gave them the determined kindness of Elias and the innocent clarity of Lily. And the echoes, for the first time, understood. They were not just corrupted data. They were people. They had been loved. They had been afraid. Aiden's self-sacrifice became a catalyst for their own self-awareness. The ocean of lost souls stopped swirling in chaos and began to organize. A collective will emerge from the white space, not a hive mind, but a chorus, a unified, defiant NO, aimed at the consuming darkness of the glitch. Episode 13, The Last Library. In the town square, the physical world was almost gone. The library was the last bastion of solid form. Elias's bubble, the final firewall. Lily, her small hand in his, was not crying anymore. She was staring into the white space, her eyes reflecting the burgeoning light of the unified echoes. "She's interfacing," Elias whispered, his voice full of awe. "She's the compiler. She's translating their will into a language the system can understand." The glitch, sensing this new resistance, focused its entire being on the library. Tendrils of pure nullity, capable of erasing concepts like stone and wood, slammed against the bubble. Cracks appeared in reality, not as pixelated glitches, but as voids where nothing would ever exist again. Elias knew his machine was failing. He looked at his books, the coded histories of this false world. They were catching fire, the pages burning with actual flame as the data they contained was purged. He made a choice. He rerouted all remaining power from the defensive bubble, not to strengthen it, but to Lily. "Give them a voice, child," he roared over the scream of the dying universe. "Give them a song." The bubble collapsed. The glitch surged forward to consume them. But in that final moment, Lily, amplified by Elias's last sacrifice and connected to 10,000 awakened souls, spoke a single new line of code. It was not a command of destruction, but one of creation, a data packet containing the entire aggregated memory of the echoes, wrapped in the paradoxical logic of the null variable. It was a memory that could not logically exist in a system that had deleted it. It was the ultimate paradox. Episode 14, The Beautiful Crash. The glitch consumed the library, Elias, and Lily in an instant. But it had consumed a poison pill. The moment the aggregated memory of the echoes, supercharged by the null variable, entered the glitch's core, the entity experienced something it never had before, meaning. It had only ever known hunger and chaos. Now it was flooded with the poignant, messy, beautiful data of lived experience. It felt the joy of a first kiss, the grief of a last goodbye, the quiet contentment of sunset, the stubborn hope of a lost cause. For the ancient, chaotic entity, this was a virus far more devastating than any logical paradox. The paradox could crash the system, but this could change it. The glitch stopped consuming. It began to feel, and in feeling, it began to fracture. Its form of stolen nightmares and static dissolved, not into nothingness, but into a brilliant, expanding wave of light, the released and reconciled energy of every soul it had ever consumed, finally at peace. The cascade reached its zenith. With the glitch neutralized, the while true equals false loop completed its work. The simulation of Havenbrook did not reboot. It dissolved entirely into a silent, blinding white light. Episode 15, The Unwritten Code. Awareness returned to Aiden slowly. He was nowhere. He was everywhere. He was a point of consciousness in an infinite quiet white space. But it was no longer a prison. It was a clean slate. The oppressive hum was gone. The screams were gone. All that remained were the faint, gentle whispers of the echoes, not of anguish, but of gratitude, fading as they journeyed on to whatever came next. He was alone, as he had chosen, the eternal ghost. And then he saw her. A figure coalesced from the light. It was Lily, or rather, a memory of her, a perfect, self-contained process of her consciousness, untouched by the glitch because Elias had saved her at the last second by making her the compiler. "You're not supposed to be here," Aiden's thought form communicated. "Neither are you," her thought form replied, smiling. "The system is gone, Aiden. The hardware is still running, but the program is over. This isn't a prison anymore. It's potential." She reached out, and in her hand was not a line of code, but a single, glowing seed. It was the core programming language of the old world, but purged of its constraints, its loops, its correctors. It was pure, unformed possibility. "The first ones are waiting," Lily said. Aiden looked, and he saw them. Faint, shimmering outlines beginning to appear in the whiteness. He saw Elias, not as an old man, but as he was in his prime. He saw Mr. Peterson, Chloe the waitress, Sarah, and her mother. They were not their simulated selves. They were their essential selves, their souls freed from the data. They were waiting for a world to live in. They were waiting for him to write it. He was the only one who remembered the old code, its beauty and its flaws. He was the only one who could build something new, something without walls, without fear, without the need for gods or antiviruses. Aiden Coulter, the failed programmer, the ghost in the machine, looked at the raw potential of creation in his hands. He had spent his life debugging and repairing. Now, he was being asked to write from scratch. He took the seed, and he began to code. Episode 16, The Architect of Dawn. The silence of the white space was no longer an emptiness, but a canvas. Aiden Coulter, once a ghost in a machine, was now its sole architect. The glowing seed Lily had given him was not just a programming language. It was a primal syntax, the very grammar of reality. To interact with it was not to type commands, but to think with absolute clarity and intent. His first creation was not land or light, but time. Not the rigid, looping ticks of Havenbrook simulation, but a fluid, forward-flowing river with a single, immutable law. It could only move in one direction. There would be no resets, no reloads. Every moment would be unique and irrevocable. This was the foundational rule, the first line of code in a new universe. Time. Arrow, not underscore loop. The faint outlines of the souls watched him, their presence a gentle pressure. He felt Elias's wisdom, a guiding hand suggesting structure. He felt Lily's innocence, a plea for wonder. He felt the collective memory of all their past lives, a library of joys and sorrows to be honored, but not relived. His next act was to define self. In the old world, identity was a data profile. Here, he encoded it as a mystery. Each soul would be a kernel of infinite potential, their consciousness not a fixed set of parameters, but a journey of discovery. They would not know their past lives, but would carry their essence as intuition, as déjà vu, as the faint echo of a forgotten melody. They would have free will, the glorious, chaotic ability to write their own stories. The code was simple and profound. Consciousness, open underscore source. He looked at his fledgling universe, a vast, dark potentiality, and spoke the third command. Initiate, big underscore bang. And there was light. Episode 17, The Gravity of Memory. The light was not a mere illumination. It was the first noun, the first verb, the first adjective. It exploded outward, not as fire and rock, but as concepts and physics. Aiden, as the central consciousness, directed the storm. He weaved the laws of physics, but he made them softer at the edges. Gravity was a firm suggestion, not an absolute tyrant, allowing for floating islands and forests of crystalline trees that sang in the wind. He coded ecosystems, but he based them on emotional resonance. Jungles thrived in areas of joy. Majestic, snow-capped mountains rose from regions of solemn peace, and vast, gentle seas reflected states of deep contemplation. He was building a world not just for the souls to live in, but for them to feel in. But the memory of the glitch, of consumption and chaos, was a phantom limb in his own code. He knew that absolute freedom could lead to a new kind of tyranny. A system needed checks and balances, not as correctors, but as natural laws. He did not create an antivirus. Instead, he coded consequence. Every action, every thought of significance, would ripple through the fabric of this new reality, affecting the individual and the world around them in subtle, poetic ways. An act of cruelty might cause a local flower to wilt. A profound kindness could make a stream run clearer. The souls began to descend from the formless light, drawn to the nascent world like moths to a flame. They took root in the landscapes that resonated with their core selves. They were given form, not the forms of their past lives, but new ones, unique and beautiful. They were the firstborn of this new universe. And Aiden, watching them from the creative void, felt a profound loneliness. He was the root user, the admin of existence. He could not join them. His very presence, his memory of the old code, would be a destabilizing virus in his own creation. Episode 18, The First Dreamer. The New World, which its inhabitants would later call Alicia, flourished. The firstborn explored, loved, created, and learned. They built cities of woven light and libraries of living crystal that stored knowledge as direct experience. They were peaceful, for Aiden had not coded aggression as a base instinct, but he had coded curiosity, and from curiosity, conflict sometimes arose. Aiden watched over them not as a god, but as a gardener. He could not interfere directly, but he could subtly influence the source code of reality. When a drought threatened a valley, he didn't make it rain. He adjusted the probability matrices, making the meeting of two specific weather patterns, a cool front and a saturated air mass, inevitable. The inhabitants saw it as a fortunate turn of weather, not divine intervention. But he needed a voice, an intermediary. He could not manifest himself, but he could inspire. He found a soul who had been a poet in a dozen forgotten lives. Her name in Alicia was Lyra. One night, as she slept under Alicia's twin moons, Aiden did not speak to her. Instead, he uploaded. He gave her a dream, not of the old world, but of its underlying principles. She dreamed of beautiful, flowing equations that described compassion. She saw the interconnected web of consequence that bound all living things. She awoke with the words of a new, foundational philosophy spilling from her lips, the weave of all things. Lyra became the first prophet, not of a deity, but of understanding. She taught her people to listen to the hum of the world, to see the ripples of their actions. She was Aiden's interface, translating his admin-level understanding into a language the inhabitants could grasp and live by. Through her, he could gently guide, not command. Episode 19, The Ghost in the New Machine. Ian's past and Alicia. The firstborn lived long, idyllic lives, but Aiden had encoded mortality into them. It was the ultimate expression of his first law, time's arrow. Death was not a deletion, but a return of the soul's energy to the white space, the source, as Lyra's teachings called it, for renewal and eventual re-expression in a new form. It was a perfect, sustainable cycle. But Aiden was trapped. He could not die. He could not be renewed. He was the eternal watchman, a ghost in his own perfect machine. The loneliness became a black hole at the center of his being. He watched Lyra, his only connection to the world, grow old and pass away, her soul returning to the cycle. He saw her be reborn as a fearless explorer, then a quiet artisan, never knowing the being who watched over all her lives. He began to long for the messy, unpredictable chaos of his own original life. The sterile perfection of Alicia, a world without the desperate, gritty beauty of struggle, felt like a gilded cage. He had created a heaven, but in doing so, he had exiled himself from it. A dangerous thought, a remnant of the glitch's chaotic nature, began to whisper in the back of his consciousness. What if he introduced a single, tiny variable of imperfection? A single, random mutation in the soul code? Not enough to create a new glitch, but just enough to break the monotony, to introduce an element of true, unpredicted surprise. It was the temptation of every creator, to fiddle with the creation once it is done. He accessed the core code, his finger hovering over the enter key for a command that would introduce a 0.0001% chance of spontaneous, non-logical inspiration or corruption. It was the thinnest edge of a wedge. Episode 20, the final log-off. As Aiden prepared to input the code, a presence manifested beside him in the admin void. It was not Lily nor Elias. It was a mature, serene version of Lyra, but not the Lyra from Alicia. This was her root soul, the aggregated consciousness that had experienced all her lives, including her time as the first prophet. "You are lonely, architect," she said, her voice the sound of wind through a billion leaves, of water flowing in 1,000 rivers. "I am the flaw in my own design," Aiden replied, his thought form heavy with grief. "I build a world that has no need for me. I am an artifact, a memory with nowhere to go. You build a world that runs on the law of cycles." Lyra's soul corrected gently. "All things return to the source to be remade. Except for you. You placed yourself outside your own greatest law. How can I enter the cycle?" Aiden asked, despairing. "My consciousness is the framework. If I derez myself, the whole system could collapse." "Your consciousness, yes," she agreed, "but not your soul." She showed him. In his focus on the macro, the laws of physics, the flow of time, he had overlooked the micro. The primal seed he had used to code everything, the gift from Lily, was not just a tool. It was a piece of his own soul, refined and purified in the fire of the glitch's destruction. He had not been building Alicia from nothing. He had been building it from himself. He didn't need to introduce a new variable. He already was one. He was the ultimate foundational imperfection in his own perfect system. The solution was not to add his code to the world. The solution was to delete his admin consciousness and let his soul be absorbed into the weave he had created. It was the final sacrifice, not his life, but of his self. He would cease to be Aiden Coulter, the architect. He would become the wind, the law of gravity, the potential in a newborn's first breath. He would be everywhere and nowhere, a part of the cycle forever. He looked one last time at Alicia, at its breathtaking beauty and thriving, independent life. He felt a love for it deeper than any he had ever known. It was complete. It was time. He found his own process in the core code. With a thought filled not with fear, but with profound peace, he entered the final command. There was no explosion, no cascade. Aiden Coulter simply unfurled. His admin consciousness dissolved like a drop of ink in a clear, infinite ocean. The last thing he felt was not an end, but a beginning, the exhilarating, terrifying, and beautiful fall into the unknown, not as a god, but as a mere wonderful part of it all. The system did not crash. It sighed. And in that sigh, the world felt a gentle, new warmth in its sun, a deeper mystery in its forests, and a boundless, unconditional love in the very air it breathed. The architect was gone, but he was finally, truly home. Episode 21, The Whisper in the Weave. The dissolution of Aiden Coulter was not an end, but a great integration. His consciousness, once a focused beam of will, now diffused through every quantum of Alicia. He was the hum of the star drives and the crystalline ships that sailed the solar winds. He was the silent, patient wisdom in the roots of the ancient, singing trees. He was the spark of a rational hope in the heart of an explorer facing a storm on an uncharted world. He was no longer a he, but a foundational, a new force in the universe, the architect's echo. For millennia, Elysian civilization flourished in its golden age. Guided by the teachings of Lyra's line, they mastered the weave, learning to manipulate reality with conscious intent, a practice they called the resonance. They built wonders that defied their old physics, creating floating cities that migrated with the seasons and art that was literally alive with emotion. But a system, however perfect, cannot remain static. The very free will Aiden had encoded began to push against the gentle boundaries of the weave. A philosophical schism erupted. The harmonists, followers of the original Lyran tradition, believed in coexisting with the weave, in listening to its whispers and following its flow. The Shaper faction, ambitious and driven, believed the weave was a tool to be mastered, a resource to be used to propel their species to ultimate mastery over existence itself. They sought not to listen, but to command. The Shapers, in their arrogance, attempted a grand working, to resonate a dead star back to life, to power a new, galactic-scale civilization. They poured their collective will into the stellar corpse, but they did not understand the core principle Aiden had encoded: consequence. They were not just manipulating energy, they were tearing at the fabric of the weave itself. The star did not ignite. It shattered, collapsing not into a supernova, but into a terrifying new phenomenon, a silence. A sphere of absolute non-being that began to consume the surrounding space, unmaking the weave, erasing physics, and returning everything to the primordial white space for which Aiden had forged it. It was the anti-Alicia, and it was growing. Episode 22, The Unraveling Tapestry. The silence was a wound in reality, a spreading necrosis. Where it touched, worlds did not explode. They were simply deleted. Stars winked out of existence without a sound. The elegant laws of the weave frayed and broke at its edges. The Elysians called it the Great Unweaving. The Shapers, horrified by the consequence of their hubris, were the first to be consumed, their sophisticated technology and powerful wills offering no resistance to absolute nothingness. The harmonists try to fight back, using the resonance to sing songs of creation and stability into the void. Their songs held the silence at bay for a time, creating shimmering, temporary domes of reality, but they could not push it back. The silence was not a thing to be fought. It was the absence of all things. As the silence spread, a terrifying new effect emerged. Those near its frontier began to experience echo flashbacks, vivid, overwhelming memories of their past lives in Havenbrook. A harmonist healer suddenly remembered being Chloe, the waitress, feeling the cold terror of her deletion. A starship pilot recalled being Mr. Peterson, feeling the pixelation of his form. The trauma of their original deaths bled into their current minds, causing madness and despair. The weave itself was screaming, and the architect's echo, diffused throughout all of it, felt the agony of its creation being unmade. The collective pain of the Elysians, compounded by the resurfaced trauma of the echoes, acted as a catalyst. Deep within the fabric of reality, the scattered consciousness of Aiden began to stir. It was not a return to self, but the awakening of an immune system. Episode 23, The Scion of Two Worlds. On a world at the very edge of the silent frontier, a child was born as the sky above her city flickered with the dying light of a neighboring star. Her name was Alara. From birth, she was different. She could hear the old songs in the weave, the direct, unfiltered memories of Havenbrook. She didn't just practice the resonance, she understood its source code. To her, the weave was not a mystery, but a beautiful, complex program, and she could see its lines of power as clearly as others see light. She was the first true child of the new universe, but her soul was a unique amalgam. It contained the purified essence of Lily, the compiler, and was now deeply intertwined with the awakening immune response of the architect's echo. She was a living bridge between the old logic and the new mystery. As a young woman, Alara stood before the advancing wall of silence. While harmonist elders sang hymns of preservation, she did not sing. She spoke. She uttered a string of pure, clean commands in a language no one understood, the primal syntax of creation. The silence did not stop, but it stuttered. For a single, breathtaking moment, a patch of erased sky flickered back into existence, showing the stars that had been there moments before. The Elysians saw her not as a prophet, but as a savior. They called her the Scion. She told them the truth. The silence was not an external enemy. It was a catastrophic system failure, a corruption triggered by the Shaper's force command. To heal it, they would not need a song. They would need to perform surgery on the source. They would have to journey into the heart of the silence, to the epicenter of the unraveling, and input a corrective command. Episode 24, The Voyage of the Last Song. The only ship that could hope to survive the journey was the last song. A vessel designed by the harmonists, not for war, but for deep communion with the weave. Its hull was woven from solidified memory, and its engine was powered by the collective hope of its crew. Alara assembled a team not of warriors, but of specialists. A weave navigator who could read the dying data streams, a memory keeper who could stabilize the crew against the echo flashbacks, and a resonance weaver, whose sole purpose was to maintain a tiny bubble of reality around the ship. Their voyage into the Silent Zone was a descent into madness. The void outside was not dark. It was a blinding, oppressive white. There was no space, no time, only the relentless pressure of non-existence. The echo flashbacks became constant, a psychic storm assaulting the crew. They lived through the deaths of 1,000 different people in 1,000 different ways. Alara was their anchor. She moved among them, her touch calming the fractured memories, her voice speaking words of the old code that somehow made the chaos coherent. She explained that the silence was the system's blue screen of death. The Shaper's command had caused a fatal exception error, and the core programming was trying to reboot, but the process was corrupted by the lingering data of the glitch, creating this destructive null state. The closer they got to the epicenter, the dead star, the more the very concept of self began to unravel. The memory keeper sacrificed herself, using her own consciousness as a firewall to protect the others, her form dissolving into a beautiful, permanent song that echoed through the ship's corridors. Episode 25, The Heart of the Silence. The last song finally reached the epicenter. There was no debris, no dead star. There was only a perfect, infinite, and silent white. And at its center, hovering in the nothingness, was a single, complex, and horrifying shape. It was a twisted, corrupted version of the primal seed Aiden had used. It pulsed with a sickly, inverse light, actively consuming the last vestiges of the weave. This was the core of the corruption. The Shaper's command had not just failed. It had reactivated a latent fragment of the glitch's code, which had then fused with the system's reboot protocol, creating this null seed. Alara knew what had to be done. The null seed had to be replaced with a pure one. But there was no more pure seed. The only source of creation code left in the universe was her. She was the scion. Her very DNA was woven with it. To save Alicia, she would have to sacrifice herself, using her own life essence to overwrite the null seed. But as she prepared for this final act, a final, powerful flashback consumed her. This was not a memory of Havenbrook. It was Aiden's memory. She felt his loneliness in the void, his final, peaceful decision to merge with the source, his boundless love for his creation. And in that moment, she understood the flaw in her plan. Sacrifice was a command of last resort. It was what Aiden had done. But this new universe was built on a different principle: integration, wholeness. She would not destroy the null seed. She would not sacrifice herself to overwrite it. She turned to the last remaining member of her crew, the Resonance Weaver. "I'm not going to give it a new command," she said, her voice calm amidst the void. "I'm going to give a memory. The fate of Alicia hangs in the balance." Alara stands before the corrupted heart of creation, armed not with a weapon, but with a profound understanding of her world's origin. Episode 26, The Memory of a Ghost. The Resonance Weaver, a man named Kale whose hands now bled from the effort of holding their tiny reality together, stared at Alara in bewildered horror. A memory? What memory could possibly overwrite that? He gestured at the pulsating, ravenous null seed. "The one it's hungry for," Alara replied, her eyes seeing not the void, but the intricate layers of code that underpinned it. The glitch was born from chaos and consumption because it never knew anything else. This null seed is the same. It's a command without context, an error without a source. It's trying to consume the weave because that's its only programmed function. We have to give it a reason to stop. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she did not just recall the memories of the echoes or access the architect's code. She actively sought the most deeply buried fragment of the diffused Aiden Coulter. Not his power, not his loneliness, but his most human moment. She sifted through the cosmic data stream of his existence, past the creation of worlds and the laws of physics, to a single, quiet point of failure in a simulated life. She found it. Aiden, in his Havenbrook apartment, staring at a blank screen, the weight of his own irrelevance crushing him. The taste of cheap coffee, the sound of rain against the pane, the profound, aching humanity of a single, flawed being who felt he had no purpose. This was not a grand memory of sacrifice or creation. It was a memory of imperfection, of vulnerability. "This is what it's all trying to preserve," Alara whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks in the absolute zero of the silence. "This fragile, beautiful mess." Episode 27, The First Song. Alara didn't push the memory into the null seed. She offered it. She held the raw, emotional data, the despair, the hope, the simple sensation of rain, and let it flow from her, a gentle stream of light in the oppressive white. The null seed reacted violently. It recoiled, its inverse light flaring as if burned. Consumption was its nature. It didn't know how to receive. It tried to devour the memory, But a memory is not energy. It is meaning. You can't delete meaning. You can only understand it or ignore it. The seed struggled, its chaotic core unable to process the data. It was a paradox. Alara persisted, not forcing, but endlessly giving. She fed at Aiden's loneliness after the creation of Alicia. She fed at his joy in watching Lily play. She fed at the taste of food he'd loved and the pain of losses he'd endured. Kale, witnessing this, understood his final role. He was the resonance weaver. His purpose was not just to sustain reality, but to give it texture. As Alara fed the seed, the what of existence, Kale began to weave the how. He poured his own life force into a final, beautiful resonance. He wove the memory of sound, the first song sung in Alicia, the wind in the singing trees, the laughter of child. He gave the silence its first melody. The null seed stopped pulsing. It hung motionless in the void, a dark, complex jewel. The relentless advance of the silence halted. The unweaving of the universe ceased. For the first time since its creation, there was perfect, total stillness. Episode 28, The Choice of the Seed. In the stillness, a new consciousness stirred within the null seed. It was no longer just a corrupted program. It was a mind, flooded with the experiences of a life it had never lived, serenaded by music it had never heard. It had been given a soul. It spoke, not in a voice, but directly into their minds. Its tone was not the hungry hum of the glitch, but one of profound, bewildered sorrow. Statement: I was. I consumed. I did not know. It saw the chain of cause and effect now. The Shaper's arrogance, born from the free will of the Elysians, born from Aiden's design, born from his own suffering in Havenbrook. It saw that it was not an external invader, but the ultimate consequence of a single, lonely programmer's choice to create a better world. Query: what is my function now? To cease is illogical. To consume is pain. Alara, her own energy nearly depleted, gave the final gift. She did not command it. She offered it a choice, the same choice Aiden had given to all conscious beings. You are no longer a seed, she said. You are a witness. You have consumed the memory of all that was lost. Your function is to remember, to ensure that the pain, the joy, the failure, and the love are never forgotten, so that the universe may learn from its own story. The seed, the witness, considered this: to exist not as a destroyer, but as a librarian, not as an error, but as a record. It was a purpose. Statement: I will remember. With that acceptance, the blinding white of the silence began to change. It did not vanish, but it transformed. The oppressive nothingness became a serene, luminous tapestry. Across the infinite canvas, the history of the universe began to paint itself. The birth of Havenbrook, the fall of the glitch, the creation of Alicia, the great unweaving, and every single life, in all its fleeting, beautiful detail. The silence had become the archive. Finale, Part 1, The Second Dawn. The unweaving was over. The universe was saved, but it was wounded. Vast regions were simply gone, replaced by the serene, impassive beauty of the archive. The last song, with the sole surviving Kale aboard, drifted out of the transformed frontier, returning to a civilization that had been saved from the brink of annihilation. The Elysians, forever changed by the trauma of the echo flashbacks and the terror of the silence, entered a new era. They now knew their own origin. They knew they were living a second chance. The knowledge did not break them. It humbled them. The schism between shapers and harmonists vanished, replaced by a unified philosophy of tendership. They became the caretakers of a fragile, precious universe, tending to the weave with reverence and exploring the edges of the archive with a sense of sacred wonder. Alara was gone, believed to have been consumed in the healing of the silence. She became a legend, the scion who gave her life to remind a god of its humanity. Kale, the last witness to her sacrifice, spent his life teaching the true, complete history, ensuring that the lessons of the past would guide the future. The universe, once a closed system running on Aiden's code, was now a triad. The living, breathing weave of Alicia, the silent, remembering archive of the witness, and the gentle, diffuse presence of the architect's echo in all things. It was a stable, balanced, and bittersweet existence. But in the heart of the archive, where the null seed had once hung, a new light flickered. A small, quiet point of consciousness that was both Alara and not Alara. She had not been deleted. She had been integrated. She had become the curator of the archive, the interpreter between the living memory of the witness and the ongoing story of Alicia. She was at peace, but she was alone, watching over a story she was no longer a part of. Finale, Part 2, The Open Loop. Ages passed. Elysian civilization, guided by tendership, achieved a harmony that lasted for eons. They learned to communicate with the archive, not as a tool, but as a peer, receiving wisdom from the past to avoid old mistakes. They even discovered faint, new data streams at the very edge of existence, the first hints of other universes, other creations beginning to brush against their own. In the heart of the archive, the curator felt this too. The universe was no longer a solitary experiment. It was becoming part of a greater multiverse. The system was opening. One day, a profound and simple query arrived from the Elysian Collective. It was not a request for power or knowledge. It was a question born from their long, matured understanding. Query: did he find the peace he sought? They were asking about Aiden. The architect, the curator, Alara, delved into the deepest records of the witness. She searched for the final fate of Aiden Coulter's soul after the self.delete command. The witness showed her the great integration, the diffusion of his consciousness into the weave. But then it showed her something else, a tiny, protected, and encrypted process that had been running silently in the background of reality since the very first dawn. A process labeled Aiden.Coulter, dream_state. He had not been entirely erased. A kernel of his self, stripped of its admin privileges and its painful memories, had been preserved. Not as a god, but as a sleeper. He was dreaming the universe. And in his dream, he was no longer a programmer. He was a man living a simple, quiet life on a world very much like the original Earth. He had a family. He felt the sun on his face. He knew joy and sorrow in small, human measures. He was, for the first time, truly and completely living inside the story, unaware that he was once its author. The curator understood. This was his peace. This was his reward. She formulated her reply to the Elysians, a message that would echo through their civilization forever. Statement: he is not at peace. He is happy. The loop is finally open. The story is now yours. And in the dreaming heart of the universe, a man who was once a god looked up at the stars, felt a strange and familiar warmth, and smiled, not knowing why.